It encompasses music, it encompasses a whole series of oral traditions as well that have perhaps died out a little bit. But when you look back, say 100 years ago, the tradition of the soiree, when folk would get together, maybe in somebody's house, or maybe in an orange hall, or maybe a village hall, and they would sing and tell a few stories. And part of that would have been reciting poems, including, of course, the famous Scottish bard that was emulated here by other poets, Robbie Burns. But the traditions go back into antiquity, and because they're folk traditions, it's very hard just to say where and how they emerged. That's always the case with folk culture, I think.
I can't ever remember a time where I wasn't involved in marching bands. My family have been involved in the local band since it was formed over 100 years ago, and various generations have been members of that ever since, right up to my father, my brother, and now my son. And I can remember when I was a kid, my mother used to get us all excited, there's your daddy coming, there's your daddy coming, to the extent that even now, many years later, I can still get butterflies whenever I see the same band. And I'm sure many other people can relate similar stories of their family and their connections to the bands.
My memories go back to just the 12th of July morning, going along with my little juniors Colorette. And in those days, you had either a wee pig cap or a berry when you walked with the juniors, and you were carrying the strings of the banner. You were just out in this massive parade and this mass of people, and you were just so delighted to be part of it, and something you wanted to be involved with, and something you just wanted to progress in.
I started off in the band actually as a drum major at the age of 5, so I think that the 12th, 1984, I think was my first day with the band, and then my uncle started to teach me and my brother in the piping, so he'd come up every Monday night and taught me and him. My dad was a drummer, so we got involved in the band, me and my brother, and then as more brothers appeared and more sisters appeared, we all ended up getting involved in the band.
My father came to live in Cookstown in the 1920s, and when he was 8 years of age, he heard the Park Music Flute Band, Killymoon Conservative Flute Band as it was called, and he longed for the day when he could get into the band. At 12 years of age, he could flute 13 tunes, but he couldn't get a flute in the band. He played the triangle.
When I got involved within the pipe band world, I got to meet different people from different cultures, different countries. I've competed in different countries now. So it's all about meeting new people. I didn't have a band when I first started off, but I'm now associated with Matt Boyd Memorial Pipe Band, and Matt Boyd was actually my mummy's uncle. So the band's named after Matt, and they're based in Pomeroy, County Tyrone.
Well, the Orange tradition goes back to the time of William of Orange and the period of the Glorious Revolution. Following William's victory for the throne, most principally remembered through the Battle of the Boyne, but it wasn't the only battle or indeed the last battle in that campaign. But William won the throne from James II, his father-in-law. Following that, there was a tradition of commemoration. Some of it was military commemoration within regiments that had been raised in the Williamite cause, and other elements of it were within, particularly in Ireland, within the Protestant community, who saw William as having delivered them in terms of the religious deliverance at that time. The Jacobite commander, Lord Tyrconnell, had said that he would make Ireland a Roman Catholic province of France if James didn't win back the throne in London, for example. So the commemorations began. There were Orange societies and Orange organisations that commemorated the victory or William's birthday. But it wasn't until 1795 that a structured organisation called the Loyal Orange Institution was then formed after the Battle of the Diamond in County Armagh, which was really a skirmish between Protestants and Roman Catholics in that area at that particular time. and it was decided to form an organisation which would defend Protestants, literally at that point. It's much more metaphorical now in the sense of defending Protestant identity and culture and so on, particularly in the secular world nowadays. But the Orange Order itself, as a structure, dates back to 1795.
I think some of the challenges that loyalism faces at the moment are to do very much with the kind of form that its cultural celebrations take, and it's to do with the way in which it manifests itself as a kind of rowdy, noisy street celebration, and that poses a particular challenge, I think, for many other people, you know, whose lives are domesticated, who are presumed to be politically disinterested these days, who you know, are also sort of living sort of consumer lifestyle choices. And so loyalism as an identity and the way it manifests itself publicly in the streets doesn't sit very comfortably with that kind of preferred form of citizenship. And I think so one of the challenges, I think, for loyalism is to find a way to reach some sort of an accommodation with those others, with its neighbours who don't see their identity as formed through street celebrations and through parades and through bonfires.
Well, the early flute bands were known as melody flute bands, playing on one-keyed flutes. They just played the melody. And then as bands progressed, they introduced parts into it. So you would have the melody line, a second part, third, F parts, E flat flutes, and B flat bass. Nowadays they would play on G trebles, concert flutes, and then there's alto flutes, C bass flutes, and on down to contrabass flutes. The second part harmonised with the first part and the rest of the parts also. So a young lad would start off usually on a third flute part, which was simpler than playing the melody line. That became very, very popular somewhere in around the early 1900s. And of course the bands progressed until we had the best flute bands in the world here in Northern Ireland.
Bands are an absolutely integral part of the community. In some areas, they're often the only social outlet for their members through their events, through the travel that they do with the band. And they very much encompass the entire community. They have the full range from the university lecturers, the business owners, the ministers, the school children, the university students, the factory workers, the unemployed. They're all involved. They're all in this one room making music and socialising together. And that's very important. It's a very important way to express your culture and to feel involved with your community, not only through the band itself, but also the events the bands hold, the events that the band plays at. It all goes towards a very important sense of community cohesion.
In 1944, an old man in the band, Hugh Davidson, he could see that victory was in sight. So he got round some of the older members and tried to get a band going for victory celebrations. He asked my father to go back to the Park Music Band, which he did. And I was 4 years of age at that time, but I used to go with him to the band practice. When I got tired, I would say I was going home. I had to cross the main street, Killymoon Street, but there was only one bus, and the car maybe went up. The rest were either walking or on bicycles, so it was safe enough for a young boy to cross the road. So I grew up in this tradition of Park Music Flute Band. I played the triangles, then I progressed onto the cymbals, and when I was 12 years of age, I took my place in the front of the band in the drum corps, and that was me elected for marching bands, I suppose, for the rest of my life in one way or another.
A lot of the members of the Orange Institution come through the family line. Their grandfathers have been in it, their fathers is in it, and then it just goes through the generations. But there are so many out there that come in from the band scene. We have a massive harvest of young people in the band scene, and it's our wish to encourage them not only to be in their band, but in their local lodge. Even their family weren't connected with that lodge. If they can come along and get interested, and perhaps if they step back from the band scene a bit, they can become more involved with their band. You know, the numbers out there is fantastic. You have thousands of bands people that are practicing and working away, and we want to encourage young people into the institution to keep moving forward and keep moving on.
I suppose Northern Ireland's very strong around sort of pipe bands and on the competition scene. I think there's about 70 competition bands, and it's very strong across all the grades. Not only sort of the top level grades, everyone will have heard of the Field Marshal Montgomery pipe band, but throughout all the grades, whether it's 2, 3 and further on down, very, very, very strong. It's a very important part of the scene for us, and in Northern Ireland particularly, we get competition with 40 or 50 bands at it, and that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. That every Saturday there's 40 or 50 bands, so it's a very thriving scene for the bands.
This is the Royal Scottish Pipe Band Association Piping and Drumming School. There's 4 schools within Northern Ireland. There's one in Londonderry/Derry. There's one in Enniskillen, one in Cookstown, and then one here based in Banbridge, where we are today. In the schools, there is piping, drumming, tenor drumming, and drum majoring provided for our students. Our students enroll to be students within the pipe and drum school, and the school set up to develop skills or to learn young people an instrument. With drum majoring, this year's been a new venture. We've actually incorporated theory into our drum majoring this year, and that's to allow young people to learn an instrument and to be aware of note values and what notes are, and to be able to recognise written music, and then eventually through training here within the schools, then to be able to play an instrument.
Yeah, well, I suppose like any musical instruments, whether it's piano or guitar or anything, you need to practice. So sometimes I suppose maybe the appreciation of pipe band practice is maybe undervalued. You know, on our band we practice 2 nights a week. We're away on a Saturday, and the vast majority of people are doing extra practice every night of the week. You know, doing probably an hour or so every night of the week, and that runs basically all year round. You might get a bit of a break in September, but very much most bands will start in sort of end of September, beginning of October, and practice right through until the end of August. So you get a month off, and it's very much every day.
A lot of these students here can develop their skills and then go on and do GCSE music, for example, or A-level music. We have a lot of experienced staff within the schools to push the students on to achieve whatever goals they want in themselves. Also, it gives them dedication. They have to come every Saturday morning. They have to be here for 9:30. They have to sit in a theory class, and then they have to do a practical class. So they're getting a variety of activities. It has to be disciplined to be here, to give up of their Saturday time outside of pipe band season. Pipe band season normally runs from May to the end of August. So we're started back on the first week of October, and this runs right to March. So it's a lot of time to be involved. Also, you're building your confidence in learning an instrument or doing drum major. You're acquiring new skills, and you're also meeting people maybe from different bands or from different backgrounds.
Well, I started off and was taught to play bagpipes at the Tullylagan Pipe Band, and when I obviously learnt to play the bagpipes, the fellow who was in charge of the band, his father had a reed making business and asked me to come and try out to see if I would fancy doing it full time. That was about 40 years ago, and we've been doing it ever since.
The talent we have here in our marching bands in Northern Ireland is phenomenal. We have world champions, we have Ulster champions, we have All-Ireland champions, we have British champions, and that's right across the genres in both soloist and ensemble formats. The most widely recognised and renowned flautist, Sir James Galway, had his roots in marching bands, and the two principal flautists for the Ulster Orchestra also began in marching bands. When you think that last year at the World Championships in the pipe bands over in Glasgow, over half the prizes came back to Northern Ireland, it really strikes home to you the standards and the quality that we have here. And the sad thing is, it's very much unrecognised. It goes without the credit that is due to these volunteers. These are not full-time professional musicians, and yet they are some of the best in the world.
Well, we get our cane from the Var region, which straddles a bit of France and Spain, and we've used that for the last 40 years. We've tried cane from everywhere in the world, but none works as well as that particular region. The staple that we form our reed around is copper, and we make those ourselves as well. And as I say, the thing that the way we make our reed is to get the maximum vibration and the maximum amount of actual, how would you say, like vibration that there possibly can be. That's what sets us apart from our opposition.
We have 650-ish Orange halls right throughout our jurisdiction, and in a vast majority of those halls we have bands practicing every week. Some halls there's 2 or 3 bands practice, and some halls there's just the one local band. And the numbers of young people and the numbers of volunteers that are involved in there teaching those young people. When you're taking a youngster at 5 or 6 years of age and where you're teaching them the bagpipes, the accordion, the flute, or even the brass, it's fantastic the effort put in by their tutors and by their band supervisors. You know, and the officers of a band are only delighted to encourage young people, and they see the good that it does and see their band growing, and then that reflects in the local community, in the Orange Hall, and then on into the Orange Institution.
Talking about culture, if you're talking about art, you're talking about something which doesn't stay the same. You know, it isn't something which ossifies, and if it does ossify, if it does become solid, if culture and art stops being part of a broader conversation with other people, then it begins to die and wither. And so I think it's important that Loyalist culture begins to replenish itself by engaging with the work of other people and finding other languages to speak, other cultural languages, other artistic languages to speak, and other cultural forms to use, you know, as a way of maintaining that kind of dialogue. Because I think this is the other thing too, is people very often, and this isn't just Loyalism, this is true of very many communities, when they think about culture and they think about their culture, they think about it as something which needs to be protected. You know, and it's easy to understand why people might see that, especially in a world of globalization and migration and things like that. But actually culture is much more dynamic, and culture is much more resilient than that. And culture is much more promiscuous as well, I would say, than something which needs to be protected and maintained pure.
I started banner painting, it was my late father who had the business, so from when I went to school, that was the only thing I wanted to do, was go and work with him once I finished school, and that happened. So like, but from the age of 12 and 13, I would have been up painting football pennants and things like that. And would have worked and learned the prime with him and that. So then whenever I left school, I went and worked with him full time.
Well, the symbols of Orangeism, when we look back to the formation of the Orange Institution, we find that some of the key individuals who formed it were members of another fraternal organisation called the Freemasons. And so a lot of the early structure, the ritual and the symbols of Orangeism can be found within Masonry, which is not a surprise since the Masonic Order was the largest fraternal organisation. So most fraternities that have evolved since the Masonic Order owe quite something to the ritual and structures of the Masonic. So we would have, there are symbols that would be common symbols, such as the ladder, which symbolises faith, hope and charity, for example, and would come out of that tradition. And there's a small number of symbols that are purely Orange symbols. One of them is, William himself, who's seen as a great deliverer. And there are other symbols that connect to the religious aspect, such as the Ark of the Covenant, for example, Aaron's rod, and the sword of Gideon, are all symbols within Orangeism and all relate to biblical stories. And they're often this allegorical connection between symbols within fraternities and the Bible is very strong, because they date back to a time when very few people probably could read or write, and so these stories were told to them, and the symbols connected very strongly to the stories. So you didn't have to be able to read or write to understand what a particular symbol meant.
The banner is painted on 100% silk. So firstly, the silk would have to be ordered, and it comes from Switzerland. The silk is then stretched and put onto a frame, and then coated with pure white lead. The pure white lead is in essence, is what has been used to paint the banners for years, and that's what allows the banner to be able to fly on parade and give that bit of flexibility, so it can be still rolled up after that whenever it's not been used. Once the pure white lead is on, it's then an application of silver leaf, with drying time in between. So once you get it to that stage, it's dry, then you can go about lining the scrollwork, lettering it, and doing the centre painting.
But one other thing I think that's important is cross-fertilisation. And what I mean by that is that a culture very often gets very exciting when it starts to move into new areas and mix with new influences. I mean, down through history, that's been the case. If you think of the way that the Renaissance, way back in Europe centuries ago, the rebirth of culture in every kind of way, there are exciting times of painting and art. It was very much prompted by the rediscovery of the old learning of the classical period. And when that happened, all kinds of new ideas started to occur. New culture, new art emerged. So I would really like to see some ventures into new mingling. I would like to see, for example, a band, a parading band here in Belfast. Think about doing a piece of work connected to some of the local painters, such as William Connor, who was a very faithful, accurate and interesting painter in terms of working class life here in Belfast. People like John Luke and John Lavery. There are many, many great painters and artists who came from inner city, North and West Belfast. Why couldn't there be a musical involving the band working with the paintings? They could be displayed on a screen during a concert, and the band could pick out important pieces of music. You could even think of a script to go with that.
The company started in 1985. Initially, research and development then was because on the market originally there was plastic heads on the market. And in 85 there was a new Kevlar head come on the market made by a company in America, Duraline. And this head caused a lot of problems because of structure of drums then was mainly made from wood. So wood didn't hold, there wasn't enough strength in the wood for the pressure that the Kevlar could put on the head. So therefore there was a lot of problems with drums. So we looked at how this could be rectified. And initially there was only going to be 4 drums made to facilitate our own band at the time. But then we made the 4 drums, people seen them, they asked would we make some, and it just started to evolve from there. You know, it was 1 or 2 bands, then 10 bands, 15 bands, then you were supplying the local market. Then it grew to you were supplying into Scotland and England, then into France and Spain, and it just kept moving across Europe. And now we supply 20 countries. And next 2016, the company will be going 30 years.
The contribution made by the band and marching fraternity is immense. Just recently there was a survey done re Orange Fest, and they reckon it generated £5 million to the economy of Northern Ireland. Now, ongoing throughout the year, you have the like of Andante drums. They're sending drums all over the world. You have pipe makers, you have flute makers. That is ongoing. Jobs are being created, jobs are being kept. And just recently, Her Majesty's 90th birthday celebrations at Windsor Castle, we saw Andante drums as part of some of the bands from overseas that were playing there. So the skill and the work done by the people here in Northern Ireland is immense. And it's only good for the future. It's creating jobs, and it's really helping the economy of our country.
Well, because we make everything in-house, we have control on the standard of it. It's not being made out of house, and then a lot of the times what happens is it's made for a price, not a quality. And we would prefer to have the quality because the end user then comes back.
The good thing about pipe bands, it is very cross community. I remember my dad, they used to go to watch St Patrick's and Donegal when they were away, so they were one of the best bands in Ireland, and there was never an issue around that's one band or one community or the other. So that was probably a big factor in why sort of my family loved pipe bands. St Patrick's Donegal was the band to be involved in, and we as a band have been involved in St Patrick's Day parades in Armagh, the 12th of July, Festival of Marching Bands, all events and pipe band competitions are all cross community, and we travel to this Republic of Ireland. They're very open. So religion and kind of community is really a bit of a non-issue. You know, the vast majority of the bands probably have a link to their local maybe lodge, or that's where the seed was grown, but that doesn't make a difference really.
There was quite a bit of helping each other out. There's an old story about our band loaning 6 flutes for the Hibernian flute band, and one old wag in the town, he got to hear about it, and he said that an uncle of mine who had delivered the flutes, that when they were delivered to an old man, the name of McCracken, he made a beeline for the chapel to have them blessed, and the word spread around that my uncle wasn't going to give flutes to the Hibernians anymore, which was a made-up story. They would have helped us out, and we helped them out. Indeed, I've played in Pomeroy in my time 2 drums from the Hibernian band while the British Army stood between us and some protesters at the top of Pomeroy. Little did they know that we were drumming on Hibernian drums.
This hall has maybe a change in purpose because the demographics of Belfast has changed. Its natural catchment area would have came from the Antrim Road and from the churches and the local community on the Antrim Road. An example would be of Solitude. We have a picture of an Orange Lodge meeting at Cliftonville's ground on the Cliftonville Road. And the demographics of Belfast has changed, and where we were once in the centre of that community has changed, and the Unionist Protestant population have been uprooted and moved to other places. So now, where we were once in the centre of a community and the community came to us, now we have to go to the community. We have to present ourselves to the community and go to them. And I think that that's the biggest change. Where once the Orange was a natural attraction for people, now the Orange has to go out and attract people to it.
In society today, it's very difficult to get people engaged in organisations. So we actually have that. We have over 33,000 members in Ireland who are engaged in a community organisation, effectively, as we see it. So I think it has that important network to offer. In many areas, there are many different aspects of community development going on. Everything from halls being used by playgroups, by bands, of course, and also in one area in County Antrim, there are allotments around the Orange Hall which are huge. So there's a variety of things. Sports pitches is something that has developed in recent years, and there's over 600 marching bands within the Protestant community. Many of those use Orange Halls to practice in. So I think we continue to offer facilities, and in more recent years, grants have been obtained by halls which have brought them up to a very good standard.
If you watch the 12th of July and you see the parades, you go out early in the morning, you right the way through to the evening, and maybe even go out the previous evening and watch the bonfires. You could go through that whole several hours of witnessing and participating in Protestant Unionist Loyalist culture. And the music is never accompanied by words. Now, you will maybe hear some songs in the evening if folk retire to the local Orange Hall or whatever, and there's some songs and there's some, a few drinks and formal occasion. But in folk tradition, I think it is incredibly important to have songs that celebrate where you're from, who you are, songs that celebrate the working life of people, that some of the traumas and difficulties of life. Emigration has, for example, been a big theme in Ireland for both Protestant and Catholic, nationalist and unionist. I know my own family was riven by emigration, it depleted the family. So there are so many stories there, and it needs more than music, it needs words, and that's where I think we also need to see increasingly storytellers, poets, we need drama. And in fact, what I'm thinking is really that we need to add on, keep on thinking about adding on to the culture in all kinds of rich ways that are available.
I think sometimes people look at how things are at the moment and they think it's dreadful, and things look very, very dark, and we've been through some pretty troubled times. But I actually sort of think, I know there's a conversation and a debate taking place within grassroots loyalism about its politics, about its forms of cultural expression, and about its identity. And I think while that debate is taking place, and while there is the room and the space for that debate to take place, I think you have got to be optimistic about the future. I think you've got to sort of say that there is a chance that loyalism will think its way out of the problems and the predicaments that it faces at the moment. Because ultimately there is nobody else going to do that for loyalism. It has got to think its own way out of the problems and predicaments it faces at the moment. And as I say, I think there's a debate taking place there at the moment at a grassroots level. And while that happens, I think there is room always for optimism.
It's an organisation that I see as part of a multicultural society that we have, and it's an organisation that has a very important place in that society, in the same way that other organisations from Roman Catholic community have a place too, and they're quite specific as well in terms of membership rules and all the rest of it. But it doesn't mean that we have an antagonistic society because of that. And I think that that's very important for people to understand. I think the reasons why people belong to the Orange Order are quite significant and informative. And the survey that was carried out some years ago of 3,000 members suggested less than 3% of them saw the Orange Order having a political role, and the others felt it was religious and cultural was the key part. In terms of why people joined, probably the majority of them joined because of family tradition. So there's many people who would be third generation or maybe fourth generation within the one family in Orange Lodges, which creates a strong sociological bond within society, of course, too. So those are reasons. That's the reason why a lot of them belong, because it's a tradition, and it carries all the family connection with it too. So in the context of our modern society, I think it's an organisation that is part of the society and has a part to play in the future. And the museum that we have and the outreach that we have to schools is an indication of our willingness to engage with the wider community and to work towards a shared future for everybody.
Well, I don't think the future looks all that good for park music, which is that aspect of flute banding that I love. The Blood and Thunder tradition is very, very strong and growing all the time. Very attractive to the young people of the day, but it just isn't my kind of music. Remember, just after the war, the Second World War, there was very, very little for young men to do, and the Killymoon at that time had 2 band practices every week, Tuesday night and Thursday night. They started at 8 o'clock and they finished at 10, and those were full band practices. So the standard of the band was good in those days, but you can't get that commitment nowadays. In those days there was no television, there was one picture house in the town, and that same picture was shown 2 nights and then a new one, so the boys could go and see the picture on a Monday night and be at the band practice on a Tuesday night and on a Thursday night. But that's not possible with all the activities there are now for young people.
With so many competing interests in today's society for the attention of the teenagers and children, it can be a challenge maintaining their involvement and their love of marching bands. However, with the current levels of interest from their parents and the levels that we see of involvement of young children, it fills me with hope for the future, and I can see marching bands being around for my children and for my children's children.